Hey, what's up, everybody? And welcome to your Tuesday edition of the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media. I, of course, am your host, David Grubb. Thank you for joining me. I hope you had a good Labor Day. We're going to talk about Jordan Poole. We're going to get deep dive into Jordan Poole, and see what his upsides are, what his weaknesses could be, how he's going to fit in with the New Orleans Pelicans. And then we're going to talk about, can he fill the shoes of CJ McCollum and how he would do that, and where are the areas where he could be better than CJ and where he needs to, again, get his game up a little bit. Certainly when you look at Jordan Poole, he could be the next great Pelican Hornet who's worn the number 3. Chris Paul set the standard, obviously, is CP3. You've also had Josh Hart, CJ McCollum, among others, and now you add Jordan Poole to the list, and we'll see if he can. Pelicans have generally not, when they've had a player who's supposed to be featured, who's worn the number 3, they've generally gotten great production out of those players. So we'll see if that continues with Jordan Poole. But that number has been pretty good to the New Orleans Pelicans over the years, New Orleans Hornets as well, obviously. So when we look at Jordan Poole, where do we start? What does he bring to the table? What are his strengths? What's his upside? Well, number one, he's a scorer. We start with that. It starts and ends with him being a great scorer. As far as if you're going to say what is the superlative about him, he's got averaged more than 20 points per game last season, the second time in his career, second time in the last 4 seasons he's done that, showing he has the ability to create his own shot and to create runs for his team, to go on personal runs of his own, score 10, 12 points in a row. He's that kind of player. He can also spark runs with his teammates by getting out in transition, by taking big shots, by getting other people involved. He can do that. His playmaking ability, he added 4.5 assists per game last season, highest of his career, showing more growth as a playmaker and not just being a scorer on the offensive end. He has the championship pedigree, having been an extremely vital piece of the Golden State Warriors championship puzzle in 2022. He was the best player in the series. He was as good as anybody else as far as putting the ball in the bucket over the course of that run. Maybe didn't earn MVP of the finals, but they don't get there without Jordan Poole and the efforts that he did. His age at 26, he should be going right into his prime at this point. He still has time to refine his game and to add more to it and grow into a bigger role with a team like the Pelicans, but he's entering his prime. So this is the best we should be getting. This is the early prime. We should be getting the very best of Jordan Poole over the next 2 seasons with the New Orleans Pelicans. Joe Dumars has said that he views Poole as a dynamic guard, the kind that you have to have in today's NBA, who has all the tools that you need to impact winning. And certainly I think he does. He's also a player who brings a tremendous amount of confidence to the roster. He has never shied away from big moments. You can go all the way back to his collegiate career at the University of Michigan. He was a big-time shot taker and a big-time shot maker. He is fearless. And that fearlessness, combined with some of these other young guys that have come onto the roster, and you add that to the kind of confidence that a guy like Zion Williamson has, that Trey Murphy has, you bring another guy in who has never shied away from the big moment, who wants the ball when the clock is running down. You add that can help energize this roster. That's another person that people can look to with confidence when he has the ball in his hands in late game situations. When Zion Williamson is driving downhill and the defense is collapsing around him to not allow him to get to the bucket late in the fourth quarter, this is a guy who will take that shot when it's kicked out to him. This is a guy who can put the ball on the floor when the defense closes out and either get to the rim or make a good play for someone else. You can never have enough of those offensively. So I think this can be an important factor for a team that over the last couple of years has certainly at times lacked consistent aggressiveness on the offensive end. You don't really worry about, on most nights, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but on most nights, you don't worry about Jordan Poole and his ability to be confident offensively. He believes he can score on anybody from anywhere on the court, and that can be the kind of confidence that does put a boost into your team. And for the comments that have been there about him and his locker room presence, when Draymond Green, the guy who he got into that locker room altercation with that ended in fisticuffs, when Draymond comes out and says Jordan Poole has untapped potential and believes that he can thrive in the environment that's going to be in New Orleans, that says a lot, because he doesn't have to say that. Yeah, probably Draymond has commented way too much on that incident, but he doesn't have to say that Jordan Poole has untapped potential and that he can flourish in New Orleans, because this is the same Draymond Green who has talked negatively about New Orleans at other times and about the organization itself. So certainly he has some faith then in Jordan Poole to be an even better player than we've seen already. And when you look at the concerns, inconsistency is one of those concerns. There are nights when Jordan Poole looks like an all-star, and then there are nights where he looks like a pedestrian basketball player, that he's just okay. And he's going to have to show up every night. He cannot frustrate the front office, fans, teammates by having nights where he just doesn't show up. If he's going to play poorly, taking a lot of shots, taking good shots, but don't recede into the background. Don't let everybody else do what they do and just become a spectator in that regard. That's what you want to avoid. And you wonder, though, how much of that is due to the circumstances of the last 2 seasons when you were constantly in an environment where winning was not the goal. So do you kind of take nights off? Because I don't think the motivation is there for people when you don't feel like there's a goal here, that we're just showing up to work. So I think when you get that kind of inconsistent production from Jordan Poole over the last 2 seasons, how much of that is attributable to how bad the Wizards were as an organization and as a team, and what their lack of goals does to a person? Can that be corrected with a more purposeful existence in New Orleans? Defensive struggles. Jordan Poole has been a heavily criticized defensive player, and that's going back again to his college days. Could he be a liability to the Pelicans when they need him to provide consistent effort defensively? The question will be, how is he implemented? Is Willie Green going to use Jordan Poole as a point of attack defender at the top of the defense and try to keep him engaged that way? Or is he going to go with Herb Jones or Zion Williamson up top? We saw Zion guard some point guards last season and do it pretty well. You know what Herb can do, but that takes Herb away from a small forward or another perimeter scorer who may have the ball a bit more than the opposing point guard. So what do you do with Jordan Poole? Do you keep him at the point of attack and have him push people towards better defenders like Herb? Or do you put him off ball to start a possession and allow him to chase somebody who's cutting through screens, or chase one of those secondary offensive players, chase the opposing shooting guard? We'll see what happens there defensively. And if they either are forced to mitigate his lack of defensibility, or they find the right role for him where he can at least be serviceable. Because as we talked about yesterday, the Pelicans have to finish somewhere in the top 20 defensively. They have to finish somewhere in the top 10 to 12 offensively. I think the offense being great will help bring the defense up, but you still have to have some level of defense where, particularly for the guards for the Pelicans, you're not allowing penetration into the paint over and over again. You cannot allow two feet to touch the paint consistently for the defense, which happens way too often for this team year after year. It wasn't just a problem last year. It's been a problem for this team. The turnover concerns, will he make good decisions under pressure? Will he make unforced errors? There's been a lot of unforced errors for him when he's handling the basketball. He can force the issue and make plays that kill your momentum, whether it's you're trying to create it offensively and you need to get into a good play, or you're trying to sustain it offensively and you don't need turnovers. The Pelicans, again, cannot be a team that turns over the basketball if they want to be successful. The contract, the financial commitment, you added a year when you could have been off the CJ McCollum, the amount of money that you had to pay CJ, you could have taken that off your books. Instead, now you've made a 2-year commitment to Jordan Poole, who's going to be the second highest paid player on this roster this season. The concern there is, if he does not produce in year 1, you are stuck with him for year 2 because there may not be a significant trade market for him. That's the concern. If he plays up to billing as the second highest paid player on this team and becomes either, the number 2 leg or the number 3 leg of this tripod, then you're fine with the money that you spent on him. Again, you're expecting more than just the 20 points. If all you're getting out of Jordan Poole is 20 points, that's not worth $32 million. If you're getting 20 points, better care of the basketball and improvement in other ways and some leadership as well, that makes it the bargain worth the player. If not, then you can find another guy who can score the basketball for you. May not be as effective, but what you're looking for is impact and not just points. So that's the concern. But the Pelicans seem to feel really good about this. The locker room questions are there. Again, I don't know how significant they are, but they are there. Questions about his maturity, questions about his effort, and how he may adapt in breaking some old habits. I think you'd have more concern about not him as the person, but in breaking some habits. In whatever you learn in a losing culture is typically bad. So how do you get him back in a mindset that he was when he was in Golden State, where every night mattered? Everything you do matters. The attention to detail is higher. How does he adjust, and how does he help facilitate that as well? Can he come in and be a guy who helps raise the standard as a player? Because he's done it, because he's got a championship ring, people are automatically going to listen to him a bit more. So does he exert influence in the locker room to be a leader on a team that also is trying to find its new leadership base? Brandon Ingram's gone. CJ McCollum is gone. The team is being turned over to the younger guys. Trey and Zion are only 24, soon to be 25. Herb Jones in that same age group. Herb's not a talker. Zion hasn't really been a talker. How does he work with Trey? Those two seem like the most likely, but also you have a guy who's your point guard in DeJounte Murray who's on the shelf, and what does his leadership looks like? So carving a role in that locker room is going to be really important for Jordan Poole. How does he assert himself within the locker room? Because he cannot be a wallflower here. He's got to be a guy who's in the mix. And I think he can be. I certainly hope that he is, but it's going to be an adjustment, and you've got to see how that plays out. The role is a big adjustment too. In Washington, he was the go-to guy last season. He got to take as many shots as he wanted. They were there for him. That's not always going to be the case with the New Orleans Pelicans. He's fortunate in a way that he gets to play with a guy like Zion Williamson, who is not a volume shooter, just a highly efficient one. Zion is not going to take 30 shots on a regular basis. That's just not going to happen. You're not playing with Allen Iverson here. You're not playing with James Harden. You're not playing with the kind of guy who's going to dominate the ball all the time and look for his own shot. It's just not the case. I think that you'd say the same for Trey Murphy. He's not going to dominate the basketball. So for Jordan Poole, they're going to be a consistent number of shots, but he's not going to be seen as and looked to as the go-to guy. He's already got experience in that with Golden State and coming off the bench and providing that offense. But this is in a starter's role where you need to be an effective scorer every night, but you've also got to be a great teammate. So there has to be some adjustment. Yes, he started in Golden State, but this is a new group of players. You've got to figure out where they like to have the basketball. You got to figure out what they do well and what they don't well. And that only comes from time on the court together. So we'll see how quickly that comes together for the New Orleans Pelicans. Ultimately, I think when you look at Jordan Poole, what you see is a high upside player, a gamble, yes, but also a player who could explode offensively given the right circumstances. If things go badly, then you're going to see the criticism that Jordan Poole is nothing but an inefficient volume scorer. That's if things go badly. But I think the optimism is there from the Pelicans. When you look at Joe Dumars, when you look at Troy Weaver certainly got an up-close look at Jordan Poole last season while he was in Washington. This guy, again, who played at the University of Michigan, Joe Dumars, was still around Detroit and was obviously, I would imagine, watching Michigan games on a pretty consistent basis. They feel they've done their homework. They feel they have enough intel on this guy to know what he's going to do and to believe that he's going to thrive with the Pelicans. So this could either go from the kind of deal that doesn't make either team better, which is the worst kind of trade, or it could be a great trade for the Pelicans in the sense that just the excitement of the potential of Jordan Poole, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson running up and down the court and working well with each other. The optimism there is easy to see and understand. So if Jordan Poole can translate that confidence that he has, his scoring ability, into consistently efficient production, the Pelicans get a guard who's entering his prime with star potential. If he cannot improve his efficiency, if he cannot improve his defense, if he cannot make better decisions with the ball in his hands, he could become more of a burden than a boost for the Pelicans in those circumstances. I think we all tend to lean towards the optimism because you don't want to ever start from a position of negativity. But it's important for us to know what the concerns are, and again, to keep an eye on them as we move forward to find out just how much Jordan Poole has improved and how he adapts to these new circumstances. And how does he fill the shoes of one CJ McCollum? And CJ, over his 3+ years in New Orleans, was highly consistent, gave the Pelicans a lot, I think, as going to go down as one of the more underrated players for the Pelicans. And I think his contributions at times are minimized when they should not be. But when you look at these numbers, and we're going to look at this really closely, the per 100 possessions and the advanced numbers of the comparison between these two, what you'll see is the areas where Jordan Poole is good are the ones you expect him to be good. The areas where he's not so good are the areas of rightful concern. So what does he do better in CJ in the over 100 possessions? He scores the ball a little bit better. Not much, but a little bit better. Steals it, not much better, but a little bit better. Field goal attempts about the same. You could equate the difference there with Jordan Poole playing more games off the bench than CJ. CJ being primarily a starter for this team over the time that he was in New Orleans. Jordan Poole mixing starting and reserve roles, so that's why the shot attempts are slightly different, I would think. Field goal percentage, CJ a little bit better there as well. CJ better in 3 points made, but Poole shooting more attempts per 100 possessions. CJ is significantly better 3-point percentage. 5 percentage points is a big gap. There's a big gap between 35 and 40 as far as the number of makes in a game and over the course of a season. But here's where the areas where Jordan Poole really picks up at free throws made, free throws attempted, and free throw percentage. 14 percentage points higher than CJ at free throw percentage. We saw CJ at times struggle at the line last year. Free throw attempts, 2 more attempts per game, makes more than almost 2.5 more makes per game. Percentage certainly a big part of that. But when you talk about Zion Williamson, Trey Murphy, and Herb Jones, we talked about them on the offensive show the other day. We talked about how many more free throw attempts the Pelicans got when those 3 guys were on the floor. Almost 25 free throw attempts per 100 possessions with those 3 on the floor. So you add Jordan Poole to the mix, and the Pelicans have the ability now to consistently put pressure on opposing defenses to get players in foul trouble, especially on the interior, and to get to the free throw line and add easy points. The Pelicans need to pick up points wherever they can to continue to make them better and to be competitive in this league. You know that the teams at the top, we talked about this, top 10 offense, you're probably going to be really good. Remember teams 1 through 5 in offensive rating, 58 wins. Teams 5 through 10, average 47 wins. Then you get the drop off. So if you want to be great in this league right now, you've got to be really effective offensively, and getting to the free throw line is going to be a good part of that. It also improves your defense if you're getting to the free throw line, because you get more opportunities to set your defense up before the other team can get the ball into the front court. When you look at the advanced numbers, again, the same concerns will show themselves and the same things that will encourage you. Number one, Jordan Poole been a little bit more durable, played in almost 50 more games than CJ McCollum over the last 4 years. True shooting percentage, he slightly outpaces CJ. 3-point attempt rate, a significant bump for Jordan Poole above CJ McCollum there. CJ even increased his volume the last 2 seasons by a lot, obviously, but Jordan Poole still dwarfing him in that category. You're going to see a lot of high volume 3-point attempt nights, which is good for the Pelicans to get. You need about 2 players, and we talked about this earlier this summer as well. You can go review it. You need at least 2 players getting 9+ attempts per night. You're going to get that out of Jordan Poole and Trey Murphy together, each getting at least 9 attempts from 3-point land apiece. Rebounding, Jordan Poole a slight downgrade from CJ McCollum in rebound percentage, a slight downgrade in assist percentage. But here's your problem: turnover percentage. Jordan Poole, 14% turnover percentage. CJ McCollum just under 10%. That's got to get down for Jordan Poole. Win shares, another concerning number there, because when you look at these win shares, the Pelicans, you could say, well, they've been slightly better, but the first 2 seasons of Jordan Poole's career, and these last 4, were with the Golden State Warriors. The last 2 years, you have one really good year, obviously, for the Pelicans with 49 wins. But then last year, there wasn't much of a difference between the Wizards and the Pelicans. So the win shares, that's a concerning number, because you'll see it impacted. You'll see it reflected in the rest of these numbers. Win shares per 48 minutes, a significant drop-off between McCollum and Poole. Offensive box plus minus, a significant drop-off from McCollum to Poole. Box plus minus overall. Neither one of these is a great defensive player, so their box plus minus has decreased, but CJ's is still a positive 1.2, where Jordan Poole is a negative 1.2. That tells you how poorly he's played defense, and that 0.2 in our offensive boxes plus minus, that means how much better you are than the average player and contributing offensively. How many points do you put up more than the average player over those possessions? So for Jordan Poole, it's 0.2 points better than the average player over the last 4 years. That's not tremendous impact. Again, with the caveat that the Wizards were terrible the last 2 seasons, how much does it impact that? But you still hope that that number would be higher than this overall. Here's where it gets a little bit more concerning at the value over replacement player, VORP. CJ at 7.0, Jordan Poole at 1.9. If you double Jordan Poole's value over replacement player, if you double it, it's still only slightly more than half of CJ McCollum's. The net rating is another concern. Again, the Wizards have been really bad the last several years, but when your net rating is 9 points lower and CJ's is 5 points lower, because neither one of these guys is a defensive star, that means you've got to produce much better offensively as far as your efficiency goes. And that's where the gap is. CJ, even though his true shooting percentage was lower, was a more efficient player because he didn't turn no basketball as much. He played slightly better defense, and he rebounded at a better rate. So there are things that CJ brought to the table as a teammate that Jordan Poole struggled with. So that's why you see that gap in net rating. But here's where you also want to be encouraged as a Pelican fan, that last category in pace. The Pelicans have struggled with pace. Last year as a team, their pace was 99.7. CJ McCollum was slightly above that, but Jordan Poole at 103.21 average over the last 4 years. That's a pretty high number compared to the Pelicans, who finished relatively in the middle of the pack to the lower middle as far as pace goes. And again, 99.7 was the highest pace of the Willie Green era. Jordan Poole averaging over the last 4 years hasn't come close to being as slow as the Pelicans have been with pace. So when you look at that, that's in a really encouraging spot. So where are the areas of encouragement? You know that this guy can score. You know he's going to get up threes, which is an important part of this offense. You know he can get to the free throw line, which will be very important over the course of this season. And the areas of concern: can he rebound the ball a little bit better on a team that doesn't have a lot of elite rebounders? Can he cut down those turnovers? Can he become more consistent on a night-to-night basis? Those will be the questions that define Jordan Poole's tenure with the New Orleans Pelicans. And when we look at not only developing Jordan Poole, but developing talent for the rest of this team, player development has to be a priority for the New Orleans Pelicans. Every team is going through this, where you're trying to find cheap young talent constantly. We've talked about how that gulf between the middle class of players, the upper class of players, and the lower class of players is only getting wider. The middle class is kind of shrinking, but the numbers at the top are growing and the numbers at the bottom are growing. So you're seeing teams have to rely on player development because they are not able to afford those middle tier players the way they once used to. So you've got to bring up younger players or reclamation projects. In a lot of cases, guys who started their career somewhere, didn't get the kind of run that they needed to improve, but you still see some skills that you could pull out of that player, refine them, and have them be a contributing part for your team. So Willie Green, in his interview with WDSU told Fletcher Mackel that the team has to pour effort into these guys every single day. They've got to be committed to player development. So the Pelicans, what have they done this offseason? They've added Mike Hopkins as assistant head of player development so they can build a stronger teaching infrastructure, because we know the teams with strong player development maximize the potential of their young players. The weak ones, the teams that are not great at this, waste young talent. They are the teams that are casting out players with a lot of potential because they couldn't figure out what to do with them. So when you look at a player like Jeremiah Fears, who is very quick, has creative ball handling abilities and a lot of confidence, and you want to see him score and create on a nightly basis, well, you've got to develop him strength, his basketball IQ, his defensive discipline. You have to do all those things for him, because he's not going to get a ton of on-court time in the early part of the season. So if your plan does not include him going down to Birmingham to get reps, which I think it should, if you're not going to play him in the early part of the season, he needs to be somewhere getting time on the court. But you've got to do those things. You've got to get him stronger, which I'm sure they're working on. You've got to give him an understanding of how to play NBA-level defense, which is always an issue for young players. And then you've got to get him his basketball IQ relative to the NBA up again. What are you seeing in different situations? Who are you feeding in different situations? Do you understand where players want the ball when they're ready to shoot? Do you know where this guy's strengths are? Do you know where those weaknesses are? Those are things that developmental coaches are going to be important to doing. If they can do that with Jeremiah Fears, he becomes the point guard that you've been searching for since Rajon Rondo. He becomes that player. If not, then again, you run the risk of this timeline that we've talked about where you have some players who are entering their young primes, and then you have these young players who you need to develop. If you cannot get these young players to develop, then you're forced to go outside the organization to fill holes in your roster, and that costs money, and you pay the Pelicans tax from not being a great team and not being a destination for players. You have to pay more for that. So that's why it's so critical for this team to do that. For Derek Queen, you know he's got the mobility as an offensive player. You know that he's got this great feel for offensive spacing and passing the basketball. You know he's got great footwork and put the ball on the floor. But he's got to improve his athleticism on the NBA level. Can he get stronger? Can he jump higher? Can he do the things consistently? Can he put together the kind of cardio effort that's going to take to run up and down the floor and overcome a little bit of his size issue at 6'9"? He's probably going to play more center because you can't really have him defend on the perimeter right now. So when you've got this guy who needs to learn how to defend modern NBA bigs, both on the perimeter and in the post, he's going to have to come a long way with that. And again, reading defenses is a critical thing for players in the post because you tend to get a lot of turnovers on double teams. You've got to be able to understand how to react to double teams, how to get the ball out quickly, how much of a post up, how do you get that early on to pin the defenders underneath the basket. All of those things he's got to be reinforced with on the NBA level, and that will fall on the coaches. You have some good coaches on this team, particularly with guards and with bigs. You've got a Greg Monroe who was a very solid passing big man and who did a lot of the dirty work in his career. He's somebody that can definitely help Derek Queen understand those elements. On the point guard position, I think it's going to be a little bit more of a struggle for Jeremiah Fears, and I've talked about that plenty of times. I think his path to the court is going to be longer and more winding. For a guy like Micah Peavy, you throw him into the mix. You've got to work on his shooting consistency and his confidence there, and you've got to make sure he's fluid with the basketball on occasion because he's going to have to drive and put it on the floor. Defensively, you don't worry as much because he's come in with a reputation as a highly skilled and highly motivated defensive player. But as you have Zion Williamson and the rest of these guys entering their primes, the Pelicans got to have their young players as contributors. You have to have a culture that allows for teaching so that Hopkins can and the rest of that staff can have a commitment to grooming these players and not just drafting them. It doesn't matter how much talent you stockpile if you cannot refine it and tap it. So the Fears, Queen, and Peavy could be, the part of a future core for this team. They need to start off as high-level role players, and eventually they should transition in a few years to being core members of this roster. If not, you could set the franchise back if you're not developing these players in the right timelines because you don't have a draft pick in next year's draft. You don't get to add another player. So if things are going the way that they're going and you don't get these young players to contribute, again, you start drafting for need again rather than just to acquire the best players possible to make your team really, really good. And the Pelicans can't afford that. You'd have to look at Willie Green's approach. He's said that you can't just draft these guys and hope. You have to and hope that they get better. You've got to build on their successes every day. Can Willie Green mold these players into reliable contributors when he is facing the danger that he's facing, the hot seat that he's sitting on going into this season? If he can do that, if his staff can do that, again, the Pelicans are positioned to have long-term success if they can do that. Because as those players who are in their primes now age out and look for their third contract maybe somewhere else, you've got a new base to start taking off for you. Lastly, before we go, we want to talk about the guy who could be the odd man out on the Pelicans team this year, just based on what this roster looks like and when you start allocating minutes, and that's Karlo Matković. Karlo's the lowest paid player on the team at just under $2 million. He was a guy that had flashes of brilliance last year. Athletically, he's talented. He can run the floor really well. He started knocking down his three-pointers after missing some really badly when he first started, but he started becoming more of a threat from especially knocking down those corner threes. Not really great above the break, but good from the corner. gives you an element of athleticism that no one else in the front court can have when you combine it with his 6'11" frame. They're just things that Karlo can do on the court that no one else on this front court can. But where does he find the minutes? Because at center, what the rotation will likely be once Derek Queen gets healthy. That's Yves Missi starting or Kevon Looney starting, and each of those guys getting around 20 minutes apiece, if not more. So that leaves very few minutes for your backup center. That's Derek Queen. He's going to get the lion's share of those minutes as a first-round pick. When you talk about the 4 spot, Zion Williamson is going to get a good chunk of minutes, even if you split his minutes in half and he's playing 35 minutes a night. If you split it in half with him in the small forward position and the power forward position, that's still 17 minutes at the power forward position. Trey Murphy will probably play some minutes at the 4. Derek Queen will probably play some minutes at the 4, depending on the lineups. Sadiq Bey could play minutes as a small ball 4. All those guys in front of Karlo Matković, because of their defensive ability, which Karlo struggles with at times, and because they have more experience than he does. So it's a hard rotation for him to break, even though the Pelicans don't have a ton of depth at the 4 and the 5 spot. They also don't have a ton of options. And unfortunately for Karlo, it seems like he could be stuck in a numbers game. So the question, I think, would be if you're the New Orleans Pelicans and you get into training camp and you don't see minutes for Karlo, what do you do? Because yes, he is. I don't think you'd want to give him away. I think Karlo is a talented player who could flourish where he's given more minutes and figures out his defensive responsibilities. I absolutely think Karlo could flourish. I don't know if he's a star or anything like that, but I think he could flourish and become a good rotational big at the very least. But what do you do if you're the Pelicans? Do you just keep him sitting on the end of that bench like you did with a Billy Hernangomez? And we saw how that worked. It got really frustrating. And the next thing you know, Billy was on the first thing smoking back to Europe so he could play again. So if you're Karlo and you don't have a ton of time to prove yourself, this is a league where, there's always somebody cycling in and you're cycling out. Karlo going into his age 24 season, he's already, older than some players, with less experience than other players. He's under contract for $1.9 million this year. He's got a team option for next year at $2.3 million. It's tough because the Pelicans don't want to give away his talent. But if he can't get on the floor, is it better served to move Karlo and try to get a second round draft pick in return so that you can utilize that and put one of these other guys, the Jared Springers of the world, on your main roster to take that spot? It's going to be a good question for the Pelicans that they need to answer. And again, I think we'll look very closely at the kind of minutes that players get during preseason to see what the Pelicans think of them. Certainly bench players play more minutes than expected during the preseason, but this could be a good opportunity to see what they really think of Karlo and his future. But he right now, it's going to be difficult for him to get the kind of minutes that he got last year because the team doesn't expect to be nearly as bad. And there are players who are going to take up a lion's share of those minutes. All right, we're going to end it there. We'll be back again on Thursday. Please leave your comments and questions below, and I'll see if I can answer those for you. Thank you for tuning in, and make sure you follow me on social media at DM Grub. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, and TikTok as well. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, share, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything here on Boot Crew Media. Until the next time, I'm David Grubb. You're you. This has been the Post Up on Boot Crew Media. See you Thursday.